I need to probably start with a few qualifiers. I've never done a talk on looking after collections at home, so it's my first time. And I'll try to do my best I can. Because the whole thing is quite a complex thing. I'll try to put together some snippets here and there, and we can have a good discussion after that. So I'll try to see how logically I can put something together and convey, a whole wealth of things. And I'm also quite delighted that Renee is here, because some of the questions you might have relating to certain objects, it's good having somebody like Renee because we can complement each other. And also I'm quite happy there's a number of people from the media here. I think that's a good way for the message to go out to the broad public. My only request to the media is, I'll mention about a few examples. Please don't bring the names. I think if you can make it more general. I have done a little bit of work with Sachin Tendulkar and all that. I'll just share a few things, snippets from there. But if you don't mind, just don't write names. I think if you can just make it more broader. What do they call them? Chatham House rules in terms. Same when questions come, I think that'll be great. Thank you so much. And this particular picture, I had to put it because Renee is here. And this is the museum right next to Renee. I don't know whether you remember the sculpture. It's like evening drinks time, Okay, now part of my interest in doing this is mainly because I've spent 20 plus years of my career working for institutions where we have a lot of collections. I worked for the Australian Museum. I worked with most major museums globally. But the interesting part is probably 90+% of collections in any country is in private hands. Could be 99%. Hardly 1%, 1 to 10% is in public hands. And there's so much focus that goes on that. How do you really look after, we use a term called distributed national collection, which includes private plus public. How do you look after the whole thing? You really need to start pushing that angle much more. And that is part of my interest in doing this too. Some people who've been at the workshop this morning might get a bit bored with these terminologies because they know much more than me with this. But since there's a number of people from the general public, I thought I'll just repeat some things. In conservation, when you want to preserve something, do something, we use two terminologies. One terminology is what we call as preventive conservation. What preventive conservation basically is what can I do to extend the lifetime of an object? There are many things that come and affect your collections. What are things I can do to make it extend a bit longer? A painting, instead of it probably totally collapsing in 50 years, what can I do to make it 60, 70, 80, 100? Nothing is going to stay forever. And that's very much what we call as preventive conservation. A good example is, okay, here is the sarcophagus. What can I do so that it can be on display for some more time? That's all. So the whole thought process is how do I, make it go longer? And stop me if you need any clarification, and we can have a bit of discussion on the way and questions at the end. This is different from interventive conservation. Interventive conservation is where something has happened to the object. Say, for example, you're hanging a textile, there's a big tear, you got to stitch it and repair it. Or there's a painting where someone's come and done, thrown ink on it, or they have, cut it with a knife. How do I fix it? Now that's a whole different skill set, and my first warning to everybody is, if you don't have the skills, don't do anything. It's better not to do anything. Better to go meet with the right professional and then do something, because doing something and then reversing is a lot more difficult. The whole value of the object goes down quite dramatically. It's good to do it right. So comparison is vaccination is like preventive conservation, surgery is like interventive conservation, right? Because I've seen many instances where they'll suddenly think, oh, let me get some cellophane tape and put it there. Let me use staples. let me put, put some stitches. And ultimately that causes much more harm than good. Right? A good example is a project I'm just involved now is a Secretariat building in Yangon. That's the gallery, the Martyrs Gallery is there where General Aung San was killed. So they decided to remove all the benches somewhere else, and somebody thought I should document it. They kind of, typed numbers, got a lot of tapes and stuck it to the objects, and then they put it somewhere else. And now there's a lot of hue and cry on how do I remove it. If I remove it, all the whole varnish comes out. So we got to really spend a lot of time trying to get that out. So it's better not to do anything. Now, when I talk about preventive conservation, the one we are going to focus on a little bit today, it is not just science. Lots of times people say, look, what's the scientific fact? How do you prove this? How do you do this? It's not science, it evolves. It's actually a mix of science with research, plus what people have observed. There are things that are displayed in historic houses for hundreds of years. During World War II, they moved a lot of collections and put that in bunkers. So what were your observations? Sometimes they might find something that works in a whole different field, whether it's astronomy or it is agriculture. Can I use those principles here? And that's very much how this whole field has come up. And like what I said, this basically is all preventive conservation does. It extends a lifetime of an object, and it also saves money in the long term. It's much more expensive to go and treat something where you need an experienced conservator. So in terms of the money you spend on preventive, it's nothing compared to how much you'll spend on interventive. I'll give you a very simple example, and then I'll probably take it a little more into your homes. Now, I had an opportunity to work, to be requested by the State Museum in Hyderabad to see what can we do about this mummy. Everyone's aware of the mummy there. I understand there's a mummy in Calcutta too somewhere, isn't it? Here, right? So there was a request. And I had done a little bit of work before. And now basically what we do often in this situation is we think, what can we do to increase the life expectancy of this mummy? It's lasted hundreds, thousands of years, right? And we want it to last another 1,000 or 1,500, whatever. But right now there's a whole range of variables, including bacteria, including high humidity. There's a whole range of things that are affecting it. So the whole thought process is, let's figure out what are things that affect this object and what can I do to minimize that. So the basic idea is a little of science trying to figure out how are things, degrading and what can I do. It's not a question of, okay, these textiles, the wrapping that's broken, I've got to replace. No, that's not the approach. The way it is, what can I do to make it last longer? That's the whole approach. So this particular mummy, very simple. The human body degrades because of bacterial reasons. Part of the mummification process very much is what they do is they take a lot of the internal organs out, then they try to put the remains in some kind of a drying solution so that the whole thing is dried, there's minimal bacteria. Then they do a whole range of other processes so that the bacterial activity is decreased. Right? That's what they do. And now when it comes to a climate like Calcutta or Hyderabad, wherever it is, it's no longer kept in certain conditions where the decay is as slow, and it's quite visible now. Really speaking, the remains of St. Francis Xavier is also an accidental mummification, and you can see the degradation, increasing now with time. So what we do here is, one is, how do I get the bacterial activity down? Easiest option is take away the oxygen. If there's no oxygen, the aerobic bacteria will not survive. The anaerobic you got to decrease it because of decreasing the humidity. So we got a case design which has got no oxygen, and then it's airtight enough so the humidity could be kept low, and that's all you need to do. And that's exactly how the mummy room in the Egyptian museum keeps its mummies. It's the same kind of technology. And that's ultimately what the preventive conservation bit is. The interventive conservation a little bit is, you don't want, all the bandages which are broken to just be lying around. So what you do is do a very, minimal amount of cleaning, where little fragments that are all over are taken. Put a netting so that everything is tied together, and tie it up and leave it. That's all. It's not a question of redoing, the bandages, doing whatever. So that's the interventive, and that one you need a trained conservator to do. The preventive is very much science.
So I just wanted to say about something very interesting. How do you take out the organs for this? Is it just abdomen surgery?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I'm not an expert in mummification, but the way they do it is through the nose.
They take out the organs.
That's mine is all theoretical. That's what I've read. Usually before a project like that, you read a little bit. They put a sharp instrument through the nose, and it's all pulled out. I don't think we should try it. So, yeah. So that's how it is done, and they are experienced to do that. And that's all put then in separate jars next to it. Most of the internal, I'm sure the stomach one, they probably tear it, but the brain and all that is taken out, this way. Right? Because usually you have that alabaster jars and all next to it, which contain the organs kept separately. It's okay? And similar thing, this is the sari that Mrs. Gandhi wore when she was assassinated. And also the kurta pajama that Rajiv Gandhi wore when he was assassinated. We have provided a little bit of support. And exactly the same, because it's got blood stains, it's got human, the fluid from the human body after the bomb blast and all that. Similar, low oxygen, stop the bacterial. And the reason I'm giving this example is very much for the thought process. Okay, now you take your homes, right? Your homes, basically, you'll have a mixed bag of objects. Some people are very focused, and they'll collect, paintings, and they'll make sure they do. But most people have a mixed bag of objects. Some precious, some not. It's all, it's got, you travel and you'll make sure you buy something and you come. And the simple principle I'll talk about the principle, then we'll just go into different category of objects. Often I get requested, what should I do about this? What should I do about this? I say, look, there are only 10 things that can affect your collection. Let's look at these 10 things. Go look at your collection context and say, out of these 10, which are the ones that are causing damage? And what can I do to minimize the impact from these 10 variables? So that's a very standard principle. It's an easy one to do. And I'll talk a little bit about the 10 things and then take it to particular case studies. Can everyone follow me, or I'm losing anyone? It's okay? Okay, and it's a good way for you to look at your collections. It depends. Sometimes if you have one or two precious paintings, right? You got paintings worth, maybe 10 lakhs, half a crore, whatever, then you might want to just do this just for that object. Often you do it for the whole collection space, right? And I'll show you a few things in the end. I do a little bit of work with Sachin on a personal basis, just looking at his collections, and it's exactly the same thing. He's got all the bats where he scored centuries. He's got everything there. How do you look at all that together, and what advice can you provide? And exactly the same thing is valid for anyone. Okay, there are 10 agents that you look at, and I know this morning when I spoke to the other group, we went at depth and they did the practical, but I'll just touch that in a very superficial level, right? The first one you look at is disasters. And often things like earthquake. When you have an earthquake, you have paintings hanging, it can fall down, you got to make sure it's got certain hooks. I lived in LA for 5 years. Every 3 months, the house shakes. And we learn not to put certain paintings next to the bed. Or we have special clips that we use. So nothing was kept, which can just fall out of the shelves. Things like that. So basically the first thing you do is, if I have a disaster, right, will that affect my collection? And you got to ask a very basic question. The second thing is fire. And it depends, if you got very basic collections, it's okay. But if you got very valuable collections, like Sachin's collections or whatever, it's quite important because you can't replace them at all, right? Or you might have photographs from 4 generations, 5 generations, what can I do, right? So you say fire, can a fire affect these collections? What can I do? Do I have a very simple fire extinguisher close by, or I put this in some kind of a room or space where it's minimal? I mean, I'm not going to give all the answers that easily, but these are things you ask yourself. The third is insects. Insects is a big problem in a tropical climate like this. So you ask, have I made the right measures to minimize insects from attacking? Often the simplest thing is to have a contract with a pest control company who might come and do some kind of perimeter treatment every 3 months, whatever, and that helps, right? The fourth one is relative humidity. Now, I know the humidity is very high here, and I'll touch on this a bit more again and again. High is not that great because you'll have mold growing and a whole range of other things. But the biggest mistake people do is they have air conditioning in a high humidity environment where they turn it on and off when they sit in the family room, and a lot of the precious collections are there. The fluctuations in temperature and humidity that is caused because of air conditioning is a huge problem. You're better off not to have any air conditioning or have air conditioning 24 hours, which most people won't do because of the cost implication. If you have a very precious set of collections that you want to keep somewhere and you want to keep 24-hour air conditioning, that's okay. Otherwise, my thing is, make sure what you really value is not exposed like that on a regular basis. You see, somebody like Sachin would have a bat that's signed by Mandela and him, and he wants to put that in the living room. And it's very difficult long term unless you put that in a special display case that can maintain certain conditions and things like that, which some people can do, but regularly you can't do. So the thing to think about in relative humidity is we have to live with the environment. The humidity is high here, so we can't change that totally. So if you can minimize air conditioning where you got the your important objects, I think that's good. None of this is cast in stone in terms of rules. All you do basically is you take little steps, and every little step you take makes it a bit easier and better. That's it. So there's nothing like it's like you have to do this kind of thing. The other thing with the temperature humidity fluctuation is often if you live in a house or a unit which has got external walls, the fluctuation in the external wall is more than in an internal wall because the sun usually heats and cools that wall much more. So it's better not to put something in an external wall. We often say that even for museums. There are certain spaces which are much more stable. If you have a little humidity meter, it's easy to read. But even if you don't have, usually the external wall is what gets a big fluctuation compared to internal. So you try to do as much as you can to make sure you minimize, those kind of fluctuations. You have a box of photographs you want to store. You have an option where you want to store it. So you take it to a particular space where you think it's a more stable environment. Might be under your bed because it's got enough buffers around it. So you find a spot like that and then you kind of store it. If you're that passionate, I would even suggest they have small humidity temperature meters that don't cost very much at all. I would imagine it's probably, something like a few hundred rupees. And that actually in 24 hours, it can measure what the maximum value is and what the minimum value is. Look at the maximum and the minimum, subtract it. That will tell you how much the variation in 24 hours is. And that will give you an idea. Even if you just put that in different spaces in your house, different rooms, you'll probably get a little bit of an idea. Is it okay? I'm going too fast or? So that's temperature and humidity. Now you look at water. Now water is, we take that as a separate thing from disasters, and often it is, when it rains quite a lot, you might have water coming through the windows and there could be leaks. So that's something you got to be aware of. If you got a very, very old building in which you live, water can come through the floor. We call them rising damp. So you don't want to put something directly on the floor because of the moisture that comes up, right? So it's much more, I mean, these are categories. You can go back and think, if you want to take a picture or you want to make a note of this, please feel free. But look at these 10 things and ask questions on each. And that's very much, how you get there. A place like, this or Chennai, during torrential rains, you might get a bit of flooding that might happen. So can that water come in? It's just asking questions, and you don't need to, make sure, you do for a flood that happens once in, 100,000 years or whatever it is. So you just need to be as practical as possible in how you do it, right? The next one is light. Now, one of the biggest dangers is exposure to light. Very simple. I've seen many homes, wherever I go, they have paintings and they're very proud of the paintings. They want to show the paintings. They have a light. The light turns this way. The light is all focused on it, right? And they turn it on the whole time just to show how good. And then fading happens, right? So there's a few options, and we'll touch on that very quickly as I go through the rest. Maybe the angle of the light. I mean, the group here today went and did a light meter. It's a light that falls on the surface that's important, right? So if a painting is like this, the light that falls like this, it doesn't matter what light comes down. So if the angle of the light is a bit different, that's good. The other one is, if you got 4 spotlights in a room, maybe where you have that in a slightly different circuit that you don't need to turn on all the time. So when you want to really impress someone, turn it on. The other time, you don't need to turn it on. So it's up to you how you want to do. Same with natural light. You might have sunlight coming into a room, falling into a space. Sunlight, you don't need that much light level, right? And one of the components in light often is UV, ultraviolet. And what you can do is make sure you get a bulb that's got no ultraviolet, and that could be the bulb that you use to focus. So it's basic, and please Google a little bit, because it's pretty hard to get technical in this one. So 2 things. One is amount of light. Second is cut the UV off. So as long as you can do both, you've ticked a box there. The next one is thieves and displacers. Thieves basically is, if you got something precious, don't have it right next to a window where someone can put their hand in and take it, right? Or next to a door. I mean, very simple, common things that you can do at home, and it's a question on how you do the layout. Pollutants, if you live right in the middle of the city with all the traffic, smoke and effluents and all that dust, it's a big problem, because you have to then regularly clean, and cleaning a painting is not that easy. It's not something where you can use a cloth, and that would be an issue. In that case, what do? Sometimes people put a small curtain, sometimes people put a small display case. So whatever you can do, if you think it's that important, you have to display it, and you want to make sure it stays for a long time, that's what you do. Okay. The very last one is custodial neglect. The 10th one, the custodial neglect basically is where you mess up. You shouldn't be doing it, like the adhesive stuff I said, right? And that causes much more damage than good. So what you can do is, best is, don't do anything. Maybe talk to the conservation lab at the Indian Museum or Victoria Memorial, give a call and ask them, look, I've got this issue, what can I do? They might refer you to a private conservator, whoever it is, get some advice. And then it's better to do it. For example, I'm sure Renee can brief much more on this. A painting, you don't use a cloth to just clean a painting. You need a particular technique of using a brush. Sometimes they might have a soft vacuum, put the painting at a particular angle with a brush. And so there's a whole different way to clean a painting. Otherwise, if you just use a cloth, you're going to probably cause more damage than good by doing it. Sometimes they might even put water and a cloth and try. I mean, people do everything, right? I can see a few people shaking heads, so they know what they mean. Okay, so now what I'll do is just to maybe take the conversation a bit more practical. I'll show a few categories and I'll finish off in about 10, 15 minutes, 10 minutes maybe. Paintings. Of all the things I said, if you have paintings, light, often I've seen, is a big killer because you got bright colors and you got fading happening and all that. Whatever you can do to minimize light, please do it, right? And if you are very, very particular, if you got lots of objects at home, some probably in your storage or garage, rotate it. Put one, 6 months later put the other one, and then bring this back or whatever, because the damage from light is cumulative. So it's better to probably make sure you rotate even certain things, that you have at home. Temperature average fluctuation, like I mentioned, look, you can't live without air conditioning. So it's a question of, how you really balance that. On a hot summer day, it's impossible to be without air conditioning. So just for the sake of an object, so maybe pull that object into a corridor or somewhere where the fluctuation is not as much. Worst case scenario is you might just want to get a small glass case or something which acts as a secondary layer of buffer, right? Insects, make sure you periodically inspect your collections to make sure there are no insects, because that's often the biggest damage in tropical climates. If you got a box full of books stored somewhere there, once in a while take it out to make sure you check, or you get a contractor, you get a pest control company, because once silverfish and other things come, they're gone. Photographs, and there's nothing you can do. Supports, mounts. Very often the painting is not framed properly. It's got its own issues because of that. So get it done right so that there's no long-term damage. The last one I said is cleaning. Don't just use a cloth and wipe it. If you leave it to your maids and your housekeeping people to do it, they would want to keep it as clean as possible and they'll rub it really hard. So you just want to make sure you say, look, these things don't touch, right? Textiles. I'll probably rush through this one. I'm talking about a slightly different. If you want to store textiles, store it as clean as possible, because sometimes some of the pollutants can have long-term effects. Store it flat if you can. Sometimes you might want to if they got sharp corners, you might want to use some kind of a rolled thing so that the thing is not there. I mean, very simply, when we looked at Rajiv's kurta pajama and also Ms. Gandhi's sari, they had done a very good job of displaying, but they had just folded the sari, and the tips, it became brittle. It became a little bit like puppet with time. So what the textile conservator who was with me did was made sure, right from bathroom tissue rolls, those kind of things, with some cloth they put that and rolled it over so that those edges were well supported. It gives you a little bit of an idea what to do. Minimize light, like everything I said, stable temperature, humidity, insects, and once in a while if you got textiles stored, say you got your wedding sari or your grandparents' wedding sari, once in a while take it out, air it and put it back. Photos. A lot of people have photographs, and I'm just throwing a whole range of hints, and later on you can ask certain things, and Renee can support me quite a bit. I think Renee is a guru in these kind of things. Photographs, one of the things we often make a mistake is we don't use clean hands. We are sweaty or we had eaten something with tomato ketchup, right? It's very common. Or the kids are playing and they take it and do it. I won't say everyone needs to wear gloves, it's not practical, right? So you need, if you can clean, if it's quite old, you want to maintain it, clean your hands, dry it, and then touch it, that's fine. So it's quite important you do certain things. And often, especially I've seen old photographs, lots of children are around, No food or drinks or drinking Pepsi or whatever close by. Those all cause quite a bit of damage. And the other important thing is often people put clips, they have 10 pictures together and they want to categorize that and they'll put a paper clip on it. With time, it'll rust, it marks, or they might put a rubber band. And all that degrades and all that destroys your photograph. So it's important that you don't do those kind of things. The environment, very same for paintings and everything, you know, as stable a climate as possible, minimum exposure to light. There are certain plastic enclosures that are good. So if you want to categorize, get those enclosures. Just Google for conservation safe enclosures for photographs. You know, they'll tell you, look, this plastic is safe, this one can degrade and off-gas or whatever it is. And you use that to category. Same with albums. You know, you don't want certain magnetic albums because a lot of that are unstable. You want something very basic, but you know, things you use on a regular basis where you just have a digital photo and you're putting a print, that's okay. But if you want something that's very old, I mean, my mom passed away and I've got all her old photographs. I really want to keep it. And I would actually go through this a bit more carefully, right? But something I just take today, I take a print, you know, that's okay. You know, I still have a digital copy, I can still do it. So it's up to you how you want to massage and manage that. Paper, very similar issues. I think a lot of people might have old letters that people have written, old archival paper. Same thing, clean hands. Clean hands is a very critical thing when you work. So don't, you know, categorize your photo and eat at the same time, right? I think it's quite important that you do that in a way. Often people make a mistake of making a mark behind a photo to label it. Avoid doing that. And if you do that, don't use ink, use pencil, something that's easy to erase kind of thing. So these are very basic considerations so that, you know, the damage you do is very minimal. Metals. Some people have metals at home. You might have coins, you know, some people collect coins. Now, metals, one of the problems is humidity would degrade metals much more quicker. You need a low humidity. Now, it's quite hard to decrease your humidity in the whole space. Often, for categories of objects like this, you might want to get some kind of a small container where you get your little metallic object. I mean, if they're precious enough, you'll do that. Or you have very old coins. Put them. There are certain commercial products you can buy that are very cheap, like silica gel. You dry it and you put it down, and every once in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you just need to dry it and replace. All you need to do is put that in the oven or heat it, and once it's dry, you put it back. So that's one way to maintain. So if you really want to keep a metallic object safe, then that's the only way you do it. Otherwise, a humidity like here, when it's 80 or 90 for a long period of time, it's quite hard. Overall considerations, like what I mentioned, always think of fire, flood, theft, and housekeeping staff, keep them away. I think, you know, you look after your collections, don't outsource it. And if you do that, you'll always have some issue or the other because they won't know the nitty-gritties, right? You might have an autographed bat. They won't know it. They'll probably get a wet cloth and want to give it a good clean wipe. And you can see the ink, you know, a bit coming out, right? Now, what practically happens is I know museums look at all this extremely critically. And that's why you go to a museum, the light levels are low, you can hardly see, you trip all over each other because you can hardly see in that space, right? I mean, you go to many museums, it's so dark. And don't touch this, there are too many signs. But in a practical home, you can't do that. You know, because you got kids coming, you got, you know, all kinds of people who come use that space. And you got to be more practical in how you do. So work out a solution. And like I said before, every little step you take, you would make the collections last a bit longer. I think that's a aim. it's not, nothing, no damage should happen. Well, it's great if you can do that. But, if you have one object like that where you want no damage to happen, take it, get a display case, put it somewhere, lock it up. That's the only way to do it. But in other ways, you'll always have a small degree of disintegration that happens. So I'll just end with a few things. Sachin, he's got a fantastic set of collections. But I'm unsure whether he still knows how valuable that is. So, over the last 3 years, I had enough opportunities to visit, chat with him. And mainly because I do work with the Bradman Museum quite a lot in Australia. So that was a connection through which I got to know Sachin. And the good thing he's done is, he's made sure every bit, he's put that in a safe place. This is a note, his farewell speech note. He's got a room in which all these things are kept. Only he and his wife have the keys. So he's made sure the security, all that is correct. I mean, it's much more in terms of temperature, humidity, all that is a different issue. He's got all the bats that he scored centuries with. This is his first cricket bat, first hockey stick, first badminton racket, and first tennis bat. And he probably would have been 4 or 5. How many people would have probably thought of keeping those things? So in some ways, they would be such a legacy for him as years go by. Now, in our homes, we probably wouldn't have objects probably that will have that much value, but whatever we have, I think my whole objective in sharing these things is what can we do to make it last a bit longer. I hope you could take at least 1 or 2 dot points that you can go and try it. Thank you very much.